So, hello and welcome to the session on Master Data Services. I'm Jeremy Kashel. I'm from a BI consultancy called Adatis, where we specialise in the Microsoft BI stack, of which Master Data Services is now part of that BI stack. So this session is really about introducing you to Master Data Services, but also providing you with a real-world example of how to use it. In terms of a more detailed agenda, we're going to start off by talking about what master data actually is. Now, if I was doing a session on reporting services, I wouldn't bother telling you what a report is, but I think in this case it's worth just being clear, as perhaps not everyone's heard of the term master data. So we'll do the same with master data management, explain a few of the concepts before we get into master data services itself. And once we're on master data services, then we'll look at the architecture, we'll look at the features that it's got, we'll have a quick look at the front end, and then we'll do the end-to-end demo that I've referenced. There'll be some time for some questions at the end, but if there are any questions throughout, feel free to shout them out. So, what is master data then? Well, it can simply be thought of as the nouns or the reference data of the business. So typically things like customer or product or supplier, employee. So it's anything that's non-transactional in the business. So if we've got a sales figure of £100, for example, in our sales system, then that £100 is very important, but we're not really interested in that today. It's that £100 is for a customer, a product, probably a retail store, and a time period. So it's those items that are master data entities. And this kind of data can reside in all sorts of places around the enterprise, whether it's in ERP systems, CRM systems, HR systems, admin systems, even Excel spreadsheets and SharePoint lists. It even turns up in more unstructured places. And as the slide depicts, we've got all sorts of vendors that have operational systems that need these master data entities. So why are we talking about this today then? What's the problem with master data? Well, to answer that, we need to just first of all set the scene and say that no one business works off just one database and one big front end. I think if it did, half of us in the room might be out of work. Instead, of course, there are all sorts of separate systems across an enterprise that do a very specific thing. So the CRM system is very good at tracking leads and converting them into opportunities and so on and so forth. Whereas the HR system does a completely different thing, but they've got some sort of shared data. So these master data entities have to exist across all these systems. So both the CRM system and the sales system, for example, they both need the list of customers and say the list of products in order to operate correctly. But of course, there are some situations where that list of customers or that list of products are only created originally in one place, and then they're transferred by various different means to any subscribing system that needs them. And this is kind of the root of the problem with master data. So we've got all sorts of problems really that can occur with it, but taking, say, employees as an example, a situation we can have is that we've got one system, perhaps the admin system, that is holding employees just as one field, employee first name and surname together as a field called full name. Whereas we've perhaps got an HR system that splits them out correctly into first name, middle name, surname. So the question then arises, if we want to take, find all of our employees in our business, which system do we take them from? We've also got data typing differences. So this is something that I've come across recently with customer data. You've got two systems that are both holding customer data, but one of them is storing them as a varchar 30, the other as a varchar 100. And I'm sure you've all come across things like that. There are often good reasons why different systems can create copies of master data. So if we take the sales and the CRM example, they both need to create customers, whether one might be a potential customer, one might be a new customer. So an example of how this can cause problems is if in the CRM system a potential new customer is entered, maybe a month later after some hard work by the salespeople, this gets converted into a new customer. We therefore make a sale for that customer. How does that go across to the sales system, which holds all the sales transactions, of course, for our customers? In some businesses, it's automated nicely, something like SSIS or another ETL tool doing the transfer. In others, it can just be quite simply be re-entered manually, or not even updated at all. And that situation where it's not updated at all is more after the event. So what if a customer contact leaves? So our customers may have 4 or 5 contacts that we maintain are important to us. If they coexist in the sales system and the CRM system, if one of those people leaves, where is the update made? Of course, it does need to happen in both places, but it clearly doesn't in a lot of organisations. And all this amounts to there being the classic no single version of the truth that we've all been hearing for a long time in data warehousing, but it applies to non-transactional data as well, in this case the master data entities. So just a few more problems that can actually happen. So we could have a situation where we've got mergers and acquisitions. So we may have a particular company or 2 companies that are both selling into a similar market. They both may sell to a customer called ABC Limited. One may hold them as ABC Ltd. The other may hold it as its full name, ABC Limited. Now, when one company acquires the other and the CEO wants to see a group level report of the customers, well, we're now suddenly going to have duplicate customers. So in that situation, we've got a deduplication exercise to go through. And then once we get on to reporting our master data, which would of course generally be in conjunction with the transactions, probably via a data warehouse, some of the challenges that can arise are that often our source for our customer data doesn't always provide all the information that management or executives want to see. An example being that we may have our customers solely coming from the ERP system, which is great, but then that ERP system may not have a field or an attribute for, say, the industry classification of that customer. So that's one of the challenges if we want to report on customers by industry classification or sales by industry classification. How do we go about doing it? And of course, one thing that often comes to the rescue in quite a shambles and a mess is Excel. So analysts can be tasked with taking a feed of customer data from one system, and then because industry classification is not held anywhere, they manually create that and they manually deliver that report on a monthly basis to that CEO or that manager. We can also face challenges with lack of hierarchies. So we may want to maintain hierarchies for reporting, and we may also want to apply some sort of custom sorting when we're doing our reporting. So it's all very well that our customers in our ERP are stored in alphabetical order, or the order they were created, but that may not be what we want to see when we report them. So how can these problems be addressed then? Well, the first thing to say is that the need doesn't change. We still need all those systems. They still need those master data entities. So what we need to do is to provide a control layer to deliver and synchronize those master data entities across those various systems, whilst preventing the kind of duplicate and data quality problems that we've come across. And Master data management is one way of achieving this. So it's a set of tools and processes that come together to deliver a clean and consistent view of master data entities to any system that needs them. And this really comes in two approaches or flavors, which is analytical MDM and operational MDM. There's actually some debate in the MDM industry whether the two are actually different, because if you think about it, the statement before on the slides there just says that essentially you're delivering those master data entities to operational systems and to analytical systems. So why should they be any different? All I would say is the activities in doing so are very different, as we will see. The analytical MDM is far easier to achieve than operational MDM. And there's a very good book that's worth reading up on if this is of interest, by a guy called David Lotion. It's a generic MDM book, so it applies just cross technology. And he lists out 3 approaches that you can take to tackling your master data management challenges from an architectural approach. And so those are the transactional hub, the registry, and the hybrid. So we'll have a look at those now. So, starting off with the transaction hub. This is quite a radical approach to dealing with the problems that we've come across, because believe it or not, it actually involves rewriting your operational systems to point to a new centralized database that holds your master data. So those systems that we've got up there, the marketing system, the CRM, and the sales, they've all got their own individual database originally. And what we're saying with this approach is break that link, at least for the master data entities only, and put in a web service layer and allow that to go to a centralized MDM database that operates a check-in and check-out process for master data entities, sorts out data deduplication for you. So of course, they're all going to be reading off the same database, so there's the chance of a duplicate is significantly reduced anyway. But just in case it can happen, this can also include some data deduplication. So this is a great approach to take if you can, but it's considered more of an idealistic approach, because if you suggest to some sort of an IT manager that you'd like to rewrite the Oracle ERP, you're likely to get punched. So more of an idealistic approach. The next one on is the registry, which doesn't involve altering the source systems in any way, but it unfortunately doesn't really get to the root of all the problems. So the idea here is that there is again a central database, but it maintains a thin registry mapping of source system to output. So someone manually creates the mappings here from the ERP, from the CRM, from the HR, to say that certain records point to an output record, which then feeds reports. So it can be quite quick to get this up and running, quite easy to get to find a single version of the truth for your master data entities. But again, it's not really dealing with the whole situation, because whereas at the reporting end you may have a good solution, over at this end you've still got potentially duplicate data, and those operational systems are not benefiting from the efforts that you've gone to here. The other thing that can cause a problem is that it basically involves generating cross-database distributed queries here, because it doesn't actually make any change whatsoever to these systems. So that may be okay if you've got a master data entity that's got, say, 100 records, but what if it's got 1 million? That can clearly be a problem. On to the final one then, and this is the one that we'll be looking at today, because it's really probably the most realistic one to go for. So again, we've got a new centralized database, but this time, rather than just holding that thin index that's held with the with the registry approach, this actually holds all the master data entities and attributes that are needed by all of the systems. So the idea is that the ERP sends data in, so does the CRM. Data deduplication and business rules are applied in the middle here, and then this middle database feeds data out to any subscribing systems that need them. So, and then an optional step is that then involves synchronizing data back to the ERP and the CRM and other operational systems. So really what we're saying is to the left here we've got operational MDM, where we're saying right these operational systems are the source for our master data. But what we want to do is we want to clean that master data up, and then we want to send it back so that they benefit, so that everyone's reading off the same page. And at the other end, this is the analytical MDM, where we're essentially enriching that data, perhaps adding some attributes, such as that industry classification, or maybe it's a customer rating that we're missing. We're adding that attribute in, and we're sending that over to a data warehouse. And any questions at this point? Okay, so that's the three approaches. So onto master data services then. So it's Microsoft's new master data management product, as you've probably gathered. It comes in R2 only in the enterprise and data center editions. And that's just reminding me I've got a prize for anyone who can tell me who Microsoft acquired this from. Yeah, come see me at the end. So, as you probably expect, it's got a SQL Server database in the back end, and it's got a web front end that is essentially driven through WCF web services. It's actually the front end where you actually develop the models that house all this data, and it's where you develop the business rules and the security. So this is quite different to other parts of the Microsoft BI stack, where you're doing development in areas such as bids, with integration services or with analysis services. So it's all done through this web front end, which just essentially goes through a load of web services. So the primary function of the front end, then, apart from that modeling capability that it's got, is data entry capability. So depending on which model we're implementing here, you're either going to get users to fully maintain master data entities, so master data services effectively becomes a data entry system, or or if we're using the hybrid approach, which we probably are going to be doing, then master data services is just taking that data in, and in the web front end, the only responsibility of master data services is perhaps to maintain one or two attributes. And what's quite good is the security is so fine-grained that you can say, right, someone's got permission to, say, maintain an attribute maybe called customer rating, which doesn't exist in an ERP or anywhere else. But then those things that do exist in the ERP, such as the customer's name or their address or what have you, those items could be locked in master data services if that's desirable. So we've also got some quite good business rules and workflow. So the business rules are a kind of a simple if-then-else type arrangement, whereby we can check a particular attribute's value, we can enforce uniqueness, we can say that users have to fill this attribute in, or that member within that master data entity is not valid. So one of the roles of master data services becomes ensuring the data quality of those master data services, of those master data entities. Because of course, if we're going to feed those to other systems, those have to be relied on. Much in the same way that you would go through a data cleaning exercise when you're taking data into the data warehouse, you would have to do the same thing when you're taking data into a master data management hub. Quite simply because you're going to feed those other systems, and you may be taking data from source systems that are not reliable, missing out fields, spelling mistakes, duplicates, that kind of thing. Some of the workflow capabilities that it's got are quite useful. So at the basic level, and we'll hopefully be looking at this today if my email server is working, upon certain conditions you can get an email to fire to alert people to respond to events that have occurred. So that's if someone's missed out a value or entered a correct value that have been flagged up by your business rules, you can alert them to go and correct it. And then if we want to get into more complex workflow, then we can actually create what's called an external action and point to a SharePoint workflow, and essentially have a far more complex approval and review process. We've also got some good versioning capability, so that can come in handy if, for example, we're going through some organizational change. We've got organizational entities within Master Data Services where we want to maintain the old version and the new version until the new version goes live. So what we can do is we can lock down the old version and just release the new version only once we're happy that it's ready. It's also useful for archiving, your 2009, your 2010 chart of accounts. There's a good security model, like I mentioned. You can turn off. If you've actually got column or attribute level permissions, you've got row level permissions. You've even got member level permissions. So that's all pretty good and pretty standard. In terms of how it's put together, fairly simple architecture. So we've got that central MDS database, which relies heavily on service broker and the usual store procedures, table functions, etc., etc. Everything goes through the web service layer. So we've got the master data manager over here, which, remember, is the prime data entry tool. That goes through the WCF layer, gets into the database, and just goes back and forth. When we need to do email notifications, database mail is used for that, which lives in MSDB. And then just finally, we've got a configuration manager just to help out with some of the configuration settings. So, unless there are any other questions, time for the front-end demo.
So is that one SQL Server dedicated to this system, or can it be shared with other applications?
Can be shared with other applications. Just the usual caveats that you might hit performance problems, etc., etc.
Have you seen this in Developer Edition as well?
So the question is, have I seen this in Developer Edition? No, there's no Developer Edition as far as I'm aware. Yes?
What target databases can it update?
Okay, so the question is, what target databases can it update? That's a good point, actually, because it's not got any capability to directly synchronize with other databases. So it's essentially just the model and the business rules. Then you'd use something like SSIS to actually do all the heavy lifting. I guess the idea was, well, why bother rewriting that when SSIS can do that anyway? Okay. So this is the front end. This is the home page that you get. And what we've got at the top is we're prompted to pick a model and a version. So the model is the highest level object within Master Data Services, and so therefore you'd have a customer model. But within that customer model, you wouldn't just have a customer entity. You would have a county entity, a country entity, a region entity, perhaps a postcode entity even. So it's got a very normalized view of the world, which can be different to, say, how some data warehouses would work. We then pick the version here. So this is just that versioning that I mentioned earlier. So we can decide, for example, that we'd create a version called latest version and only expose that to the users, and that's effectively what I've got here. Mine just happens to be called version 1, which is the default. So looking at the functions that we've got available, so we've got an Explorer, which is essentially the data entry tool, whereby we'd add a new member, we'd update a member, etc., delete members as well. Then we've got the version management. This is where we'd create the new versions, and then we'd also go through the quite key process of validating the versions. Now, when we validate the versions, the business rules will actually fire, and if the validation succeeds, then that's when we know that we can feed data to other systems. So the validation is a quite key concept, but we're actually going to be automating it later on from SSIS. So we'll see that in action. We've then got the integration management. So as I've mentioned with the guy who had the question at the front, this isn't actually going to pull data from this front end from other systems. On the import side, what it's going to let you do is, if you have populated the master data services staging tables, which we're going to do shortly, then it will allow you to import data into the master data services front end. And then on the export side, it's not actually going to send data anywhere. What it's going to do is allow you to create an object called a subscription view, and these subscription views essentially result in a SQL Server view being created in the underlying MDS database, and then it's up to other systems to then connect to those subscription views and retrieve the data. System administration is where we go through and we actually model the entities, configure some other objects that we've got. So we've got things like, a couple more terms to give you. We've got things called attribute groups, which essentially allow you to put certain attributes together in one pot, so that when you're, say, presenting certain attributes to a marketing user, you only want to perhaps expose the marketing attributes of your product entity. So the marketing people perhaps only want to see the brand and the product category and that kind of stuff, and perhaps are not so interested in the more low-level stuff that you might find in a product hierarchy. So then, as I mentioned, we've got all the permissions, which is just pretty standard, as you'd expect from any kind of tool like this. So onto the Explorer then. This is being a bit slow on my little laptop, so I hope you forgive that. So then we get an overview of what's in our customer model, and in this case, I've just created a very basic customer entity, whereby I've just got a handful of attributes. So I've got their name and also their code. Now all master data services entities always come with a name and a code, and it's the code that uniquely identifies the member within the entity. The name, I could have split that out into first name and last name, etc., but as it's a demo, I didn't. The gender, the city, industry classification, and member status are all in blue as links, because they're what's called domain attributes. And that's quite good, and that helps with ensuring data quality, because what a domain attribute is essentially it's an attribute that's based on another entity. So within this model, if we go to the entities drop-down, we've got a bunch of other entities in here that you're perhaps not seeing originally when we look at the customers. So we've got the customer. The customer has a gender, which points to the gender attribute, has a city, etc., etc. But then what we've also got is that the city then points to a region, and a region then points to a country. So it is, as I said earlier, it is a normalized structures for your entities. So if I click the edit icon, we'll get a list of the members that I've got within this entity. And this is just some data that I've imported from AdventureWorks. So fairly kind of standard stuff, really. And what we can do is in this case, I've got full permissions, and I can edit anything in this grid. I can delete things in this grid, and I can even actually kick off the validation from here if I want to. But what I'm going to do and actually just to give you an overview, so here are the attributes, and this is that industry classification that I mentioned in the example earlier that perhaps wouldn't be maintained by the ERP, and we want to use master data services to maintain that. So I'm going to click on the add button and go and add a new member. So I'm just going to call this test customer. Give it any code. And then what happens is that once we've created the member and it's saved that to the MDS database, we edit the attributes of the member separately. And I'll do that by clicking the edit icon. So I'll pick the gender, industry classification, pick the city, which will derive the region and the country. And then this member status is not something you would normally give to users to actually edit. I would normally lock this down. This is actually one of the ways you can do workflow, and we'll be seeing that in action shortly. So that's now saved, and we click the back button to get back to our list of master data entities. Okay, so that's just the basics. Any questions at that point? Okay, great. So we'll remove the slide. We'll go back to the slides even. And just talk about the demo scenario that we're going to be looking at. So it's pretty much what I said earlier, and that is that we've got customer data existing in a source system. In this case, it's AdventureWorks. So we've got someone maintaining that system. They're going to add a new customer for us, but it's not going to maintain that industry classification that our manager wants to see in the report. So therefore, we're going to import some of that customer data into master data services. The scenario I'm going to present is that we're doing an incremental import. So we've already imported some data, and we're going to import some more. And then what we want to happen is we want a user to be alerted when that new customer arrives. We want to mark that member quite clearly as invalid because it's missing information, and we want to set up business rules to ensure that the member is not valid until the validation process and the industry classification have been completed. And that's a very simple example, but we could you can go a lot further with the business rules if you need to. And then once we've done that, we're going to feed the data warehouse from master data services. So a few other presentations I've seen a while ago on MDS kind of suggest you might point this master data directly at your data warehouse, but you wouldn't. Your data warehouse would need to take a feed of these master data entities. So this is the scenario just in a graphical form. So we've got data in AdventureWorks. We're going to use SSIS to check for changes based on a control date. So we're going to maintain our last updated date of our customer entity. We're going to feed that into master data services. That's going to go into master data services, and everyone's going to be able to see it. But we're then going to do the validation process, which hopefully should kick off which will kick off the business rules, and will hopefully kick off the email to alert this person here to make the changes in the master data manager. Once that's done, and this will typically be on a nightly basis, we're going to feed data into the data warehouse, again via SSIS. And then on top of the data warehouse, we're going to have an AS cube, and we're going to have a user pulling data and producing that industry classification report from Excel. So I haven't written a front end for AdventureWorks. That would have been going too far. Instead, what I've done is that I've just inserted into the transactional tables that exist within the actual AdventureWorks 2008 R2 database. So I'm inserting a customer called Joe Blogs. He's living somewhere in London, and I'm updating that business entity address table. So essentially just replicating everything that hopefully the front end in the transactional system would do. So I run that, and I've therefore now got a new row, hopefully, in that customer table in the source system. I've then got an SSIS package, which is going to retrieve data from the master data services staging tables. Sorry, it's going to load data into the master data services staging tables. I've then got a SQL statement that I'm executing against the MDS database, which runs a store procedure that's called staging sweep. And what this does is to take data that's in the staging tables and import it into MDS's coded tables. So MDS doesn't maintain a table called dbo.customer, because you can create so many different models and so many different entities within one database. If you think about how many master data entities you might have in a business, you might have 20, ranging from things like product and transaction type and promotion and all those things. That it doesn't just kind of name those tables nicely for you, unfortunately. What it does is it will call the customer table something like DBO1_1_2, and then what you would do is you would set up that subscription view that I'd mentioned, and then MDS would know that the subscription view points to whatever table it's going to manage. So it manages all that for you, and so it's not recommended to take data directly from the tables. So that staging sweep table, that staging sweep store procedure, that just figures out what's the table that it needs to insert the customer data entities into. This all happens asynchronously via service broker, so I'm just issuing a little wait there to stop to check when the batch status has been updated. So there's a batch status table that monitors the staging load, and we don't want to proceed and do operations on that customer data until that has finished. Once it has finished, we then want to validate the model, which will cause the business rules to fire. So I'm going to execute that now, which will give a chance for the email to work. And going into the data flow, so we've just got one row coming in there. That's the Joe Blogs that we entered. So I'm going to continue there. And then what's happened is that, I'll just close this. We've essentially inserted that data into two tables because, like any product, it's got its own way of doing things, and what it's expecting is that data's is that new members need to be inserted into a table called TBL staging member, and then any attributes for that entity need to be inserted into TBL staging member attribute. So the attributes that we've updated are things like the gender and the address information, all the stuff that's held in AdventureWorks. But then we need to pivot that around and give that in the format that Master Data Services expects. So the validation's all succeeded, so we'll stop that. So if we go back to Master Data Services now, and I'm just going to click refresh. And sure enough, we've got that new customer called Joe Blogs. It's got the information that we had in AdventureWorks, such as the gender and the address information, but it's missing the industry classification. So therefore, the business rules the validation process has happened. The business rules have run, and therefore that is why we've got the red icon next to the customer. Just to show you how that's happened, if I go back and I go to the system administration and I go to the So this is where I'd set up, as the menu's indicating, build my models, build my entities, attribute groups, any hierarchies that I want. But I've got a business rule here. I've got a number of business rules. And if I just hover over each of these, we can see what they're doing. So this one, the default member status, the first one, that's basically saying if we're just creating new members, we don't want any validation processes really to happen on that. So we're just going to default that to complete. These are in the wrong order, but they've got a priority. So what we're doing there on the next one is that if the member status is new and the classification is not equal to blank, then it's complete and it's okay. And then finally, the last one that will fire, if I hover over this one, this is saying if the member status is equal to new, then the member status is not valid. And what that means, when in the then part of your rule, which is your action, if you're saying that any attribute within your entity is not valid, then that will cause the notification to occur, and that notification is going to me. So in theory, if we refresh this Hotmail account I've set up, I hopefully should have a new email. SMTP is working. I've got one new message apparently. There we go. So we've got the notification. So we get presented just with a simple message saying what the model is, saying what the version is, etc., when the rule was issued, and we click on that link, and with any luck, we should get the edit member page, which we do. So, and it's showing us down the bottom which business rule has fired, what its condition was, and what the issue description is. So it's telling us that the member status is not valid. So the question is, if you get 5 new customers, would you get 5 emails? No, you wouldn't get 5 emails. You'd get 1 email, and that's one of the settings that you can configure via the configuration manager. So that's reasonably sensible. So we click the edit icon, update the industry classification. So this person's going to be in finance. Click the save. Validation happens automatically if you're editing or adding a single member, but if you're doing edits on multiple members, then it doesn't happen automatically, or you can always schedule it manually. But in this case, the validation has happened. So just because we picked an industry classification, the other rule has fired to say that the member status is now complete. So we're done with that edit window now. We'll go back to Master Data Manager, go back into Explorer, and just prove that we have indeed now got a valid member here in our customer entity. So that's it, and that's the role of MDS completed. But now what we want to do is we want to feed data from MDS into the data warehouse. So as we're okay for time, I'll just show you how you set up the subscription views. So we go back home, go into the integration management. Here are all the staging batches that I've imported recently. So this is on the import side. So if you've populated those staging tables, then you can go and just import manually here. But that's exactly equivalent to what we've just done in here, so we don't need to worry about that. Then on the export side, this is where you've got the subscription views. So this is the way to take data out. So, yep.
You can't do updates, can you?
You can do updates, yes. What you have to do is to just essentially put them to a different table. So if you've, for example, you want to update the customer's name, you would put that into a table called the staging member attributes. But you can't update the member's unique identifier, which is possibly what you're getting at.
That's fine, it's just attribute.
Yeah.
When you did that lookup to find the existing, to look for the existing customer, you then branch off and...
You would, exactly. Yeah. I didn't bother, I don't think, in this case, but yes, you would have another branch there to do the update. Okay, so we'll quickly create a subscription view. So again, just click the Add button. We'll call this Customer Demo Subview. The model, we pick Customer. So notice I've got one called Product, for example. I've got a load of other junk ones. This is where you pick a version. So if I had multiple versions, I can base a subscription view actually on a version. So if you are doing that scenario where you're maintaining a separate version for test data versus another version for your live data, then you could do that with versions, and that's how you do that. You can also base your subscription view on a version flag. So you could have a version flag set up called current, and that would just always point to the current version for anyone who's relying on always taking the current version. So we then pick the entity. So this will now filter on any entities that are in my customer model, and I'm going to pick the customer entity. If I had any hierarchies, which I don't in this model, you could also pick a hierarchy which will output in a denormalized Kimball style dimensional view. And we can then pick a format of our view we want to create. So we can just create a flat denormalized structure. We can create it in parent-child. And we've also got, this reminds me, we've also got the ability to create consolidated members within one entity. So therefore, that makes it easy for master data services to manage structures such as a profit and loss account, whereby you've got a very ragged structure. So the entities that I've been dealing with are very regimented, customers, products, etc., etc. But if you had something that was more ragged, then this could cope with it. So we'll create a leaf attributes one, click save. Oops, make a version. Click save. And what we should have then, if we go into SQL Server, we go into the MDS database, and we've got MDM customer demo subview, which if I run a select statement on this, it's just going to return all of our customers in a flattened form. Notice, however, that it's not, if we scroll right, it's going to return the city because the city is directly related to the customer, but it won't return other entities that we typically want in this feed, such as the region or the country, because those are directly related to the city rather than being directly related to the customer. So again, it's that normalized setup that it's maintaining. And it's just worth mentioning as well that if we scroll over to the right, what is quite useful is that if we set up a subscription view, depending on which type of subscription view we set up, we may or may not get the validation information returned. I would say you would always want the validation information, because if something's invalid, you don't want to then say take that into a data warehouse or feed that to another system. And the subscription views that you can create from the derived hierarchies, as they're called, are very useful, and they do contain that country and that region and everything that you'd really want to feed into the data warehouse. But unfortunately, because they don't expose the validation status, they become a bit of a pain. So what I would suggest doing is what I've done here. If I go back to MDS itself, is that I've got a subscription view in my customer model. I've got a leaf attributes for the customer. I've got leaf attributes for the region, for the country and the city. And I'm joining those together so that I'm always exposing the validation status at every level and just double checking that we haven't got any problems before we load that into the data warehouse. So speaking of which, if I go to another SSIS package that I've got, so I've got load data warehouse customer dimension. It's got 3 steps, so it's reading from the MDS, but critically it's reading from that subscription view. If we go in and have a look, again it's very basic. It's passing that MDS subscription view through anything that's changed since the last load. It's looking up against the data warehouse. If it doesn't exist, it's going into the dimension table. If it does exist, we're putting it into an update table and dealing with it in a set-based update later on. We're cheating a bit here. I'm also putting some dummy fat rows in, which I typically wouldn't do in a dimension data load for a data warehouse. And then afterwards, we're also processing our analysis services database with an XMLA script. So if I go to Excel, I've just got a basic report here that's just a report by industry classification. And if I refresh at the moment, hopefully we haven't got anything. We haven't got Joe blogs in there. What I'm going to do is execute this SSIS package. And hopefully that should go through fairly quickly. With any luck, if we refresh, we've now got an extra customer and an extra industry classification, and our manager's probably not interested in the detail, but it now gets our report by industry classification. Okay, any questions at this point?
When you load the data in, did it just check to get the subscription?
Okay, so the question was when I've loaded data in, I did a check. Was that against the subscription view? Yeah, absolutely it was. I'll just show that. So look up against data warehouse.
On the load.
Oh, sorry, on the load. Yeah, and in fact, yeah, I hope it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, because it'd be pretty tough to do it anywhere else because again, to go into the database, because it's just allowing you to create as many entities as you want on the fly. Those are all the entities that we've got. Yes?
When you've got data coming from disparate systems, a customer example, is there any capability to join on things other than just code? So maybe you want to join the code initially, but if that's not available, then use some fuzzy lookup or use postcode.
Okay. So the question is, can we get more complex? Can we join on items other than the code? Can we do fuzzy lookups? Well, first of all, yes, you can in SSIS anyway. SSIS has got a fuzzy grouping and a fuzzy lookup task, both of which are pretty useful. But MDS actually comes with its own set of functions that might be able to help you with those activities. So if I go to the MDS database now, I can just hopefully find those. I believe they're table-valued functions. I think some are table-valued and some are scalar. So yeah, there we go. So there's you can use regular expressions to do matching, and then I think one of these ones down here is a fuzzy one. So yeah, that's doing a MDQ.similarity. So that's doing fuzzy matching, and that actually uses the .NET CLR. I forget the fact. We can find out which the assembly is. So that's using that assembly there. It's got its own assembly called master.NET services.data quality. So yeah, that's certainly worth looking at. Okay. So back to the slides to finish up. So just as a summary, what we've covered. So we know that master data entities are the reference data or nouns of the business. There's a good book by David Loshin that outlines 3 approaches: transactional hub, registry, and hybrid. Transactional hub and registry are probably fair to say more theoretical, but the hybrid is the one that's going to be useful. We've seen the business rules working. We've seen that we can have notifications. I haven't demoed the SharePoint stuff, but the new SharePoint workflows in 2010 look extremely good, so that might be worth checking out. If you want to do this kind of master data management but have a more complex approval process, then SharePoint can really help. And we've seen we've got those other bits and pieces as well. We've got the versioning and the security capability, which can be useful in their own right. We haven't got much in the way of data integration capabilities, but then again, we've got SSIS, which can take care of all that for us.